the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, May 2nd, 2013. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room as always, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Couple of program notes. On next Monday's show, as a guest, we're going to have Diane McGilvery of the McGilvery Machine Company. They're running a series of ads here on RBN that impressed me because they're using their very valuable advertising time to basically put out messages regarding the current situation in this country, and then at the very end, the last few seconds, they say, this is the McGilvery Machine Company. So these are obviously ads that are definitely in the public interest, and I admire companies that will do that sort of thing. So we're going to have Diane on the show Monday to talk about what motivated them to spend their money for ads that basically are not about themselves here. On Tuesday, we are going to have Pepe Escobar as our guest on the air. He is a Brazilian investigative journalist. He's worked as a foreign correspondent. He's in London right now. We were trading messages earlier today. He's been all over the world. He writes for The Nation, Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, and so it's going to be a lot of fun having him on the show to talk about current events here. Now, the corporate media is starting to basically suffer from Boston fatigue. They're still trying to find ways to talk about it. And, they're talking about, the cell phone calls going back and forth, and they're still trying to go on about the fireworks and the rest of it. But I think the Boston fatigue has definitely set in. And whatever the agenda was here, to anger Americans against those gosh darn Muslims and the rest of it, obviously has not worked, and they're starting to move on. They're talking about this rap musician who died of a drug overdose, and it's still going on about Michael Jackson's wrongful death lawsuit. And so they're starting to sort of fan out and get away from Boston. They're still pushing it. That's still the top story. But interesting little story came out. Been a lot of talk about surveillance cameras just blossoming across the country in the wake of Boston, and all this talk about facial recognition technology. And if you've ever watched CSI, whatever city they're in this week, they'll take a blurry photo of somebody and they'll res it up so it looks like it's high-def television, send it to the computer, and the computer says, this is your guy. And, of course, that's television, because now they're basically admitting, there's a lot of facial recognition technology already out there watching you. And none of it worked. It failed. And that is really the lesson to take away from the Boston bombing. If the official story is true, and I don't think it is, but if that official story of the Boston bombing is true, it tells us the facial recognition technology failed, the surveillance cameras all failed, the Department of Homeland Security failed, the TSA failed, the crotch grabbing failed, the FBI failed, the CIA failed. You're looking for government departments to make cuts on to balance the federal budget. There's the list right there. All those billions of dollars that went in there and no tangible positive result at all. And now they're admitting all of this security industrial complex facial recognition doesn't really work in the real world the way it does on all those wonderful little TV shows that you see. Now, we mentioned this yesterday, but I want to recap it briefly to underscore the degree of fraud that percolates throughout this whole Boston story. Saudi Arabia is now officially denying a report that they had sent a written warning about the Tamerlan brothers, or rather the Tsarnaev brothers, to the United States back in 2012, just trying to link Saudi Arabia and terror, and they were trying to drag them in earlier on, and now they're back to screaming about Al-Qaeda. That's now officially been denied. A lot of fake stories were put out in the corporate media about Boston. And then the next day they say, well, forget what we said yesterday. This is what we want you to believe today. And once you recognize that continuing pattern of trial and error propaganda, it becomes obvious propaganda is what you're being fed. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is now trumpeting the fact that the FBI has succeeded in locating the laptop belonging to Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, which was supposedly thrown away into a landfill by one of his college buddies that is now been arrested and is no longer available for interviews. this is straining credibility. If you've ever seen how a landfill operation works, they got these big, heavy machines that just crush things down. And there are tons of material being added all the time. The idea that they dug down through this landfill and found the one correct laptop and found it in working order absolutely defies the laws of statistics. This is feeling like another laptop of death. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, a few years ago, in yet another one of the interminable number of attempts to frame Iran for nuclear weapons, there was this laptop that surfaced through the MEK, supposedly stolen from an Iranian scientist, on which was all this information about how to build a nuclear bomb. And it turned out that a lot of the charts and graphs that were there had just been made up and don't actually work for anybody who actually knows anything about nuclear physics. And it eventually came out that Mossad had simply taken this laptop and just filled it with all kinds of incriminating information, gave it to MEK and said to MEK, give this to the United States and they'll believe Iran is evil and we will have our war. So the probability that the FBI went out to this landfill and dug down and found this laptop, because remember, a few days ago they said that's where they were looking for this laptop. And of course, even if they found the real laptop, we can't rule out the FBI simply going in there and planting whatever they want to sell the official story. So they're out there and say, yes, we've got the laptop, that clinches the story, and all you wacko conspiracy people need you to shut up and get with the program. Anyway, and of course, it continues to come out that the Tsarnaev brothers were linked to the Central Intelligence Agency. It appears that they were recruited and sent back to their home countries as operatives. Russia has linked them in with CIA-linked agents provocateurs. Apparently this uncle, who's the darling of the media, and he's out there screaming about radicalization and all the rest of it, he's married the daughter of a CIA official, was involved in this $6 billion money laundering investigation, and turns out he was part of the pipeline by which the U.S. was funding Chechen terrorists attempting to overthrow the Russian government. So this is dirty just from top to bottom. I've gotten a lot of emails from people who are trying to sort of blur the discussion here online. We're talking about the decline of the economy, the collapse of our infrastructure, these endless wars to prop up the bankers, and we're basically looking forward to the fact that sooner or later this whole system has to come crashing down. And one of the attempts at poisoning the well propaganda that we keep seeing fed in here all the time is there's some mythical secret group that wants to crash civilization. And then, of course, that allows the defenders of the orthodoxy to come in and say, why would anybody want to crash the civilization? And it's a straw man argument. Nobody wants to crash civilization. The problem is nobody can stop it from happening as long as we remain enslaved to private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. Sooner or later, it all collapses from death. What's going on is they're looking for somebody to take the blame, to dodge responsibility. When it all comes crashing down, oh, it wasn't us, it was the Iranian hackers, it was the Illuminati, it was the Bilderbergers, it was space aliens and their UFOs out at Area 51. These are not people with any sense of moral responsibility. They're never going to accept the blame for what they've done. They're looking for a scapegoat. They're just going to build up demons. Oh, it's those Muslims. They did it. You go hate them, hurt them, leave us alone. We're good people. The U.S. Army apparently issued a warning regarding a terror threat for today. So far, I'm not seeing any large clouds of smoke or bright flashes in the sky, but the Department of Defense warned there might be a terror attack today, May 2nd, because it is the 2-year anniversary of the killing of that guy they tried to tell us was Osama bin Laden. Yet another very well-documented government hoax. The real bin Laden died of natural causes in late 2001, and all the bin Ladens since then have been fakes, including the photos of the dead body they were showing us 2 years ago. And we exposed them on our website, as they were not only fakes, they were very badly done fakes. If I were still in the visual effects business, I wouldn't hire these clowns. They're incompetent. They're completely incompetent. So, Department of Homeland Security is now out with a new training video that depicts citizens' militias as chemical weapon-wielding terrorists. They're developing a real bunker mindset. You know, anybody not perfectly in conformance with the U.S. government is a terrorist threat. You're all evil. And I think that's being manifested by this program down in Palm Beach County, Florida, where the sheriff just got $1 million grant for what is called a violence prevention unit. And what this unit is really all about is they're launching a massive recruitment advertising campaign to convince people of Florida to snitch on anybody who speaks disapprovingly of the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve, and the war policy. And this is a repeat of exactly what the Nazis did in Germany. Recruiting people into being snitches. They'd go out and they'd find these losers who had nothing going on in their life, and they'd say, you can be a snitch. Well, they didn't call it a snitch. You can be a informant, an asset, an agent for the government, and you can feel important about yourself because you're ratting out people of the government. The same way that the FBI recruits informants on our college campuses. They go out and they find the losers who don't have anything else going for them, and they say, you get to be James Bond in real life. And oh, these kids say, yes, I'll report on everything to the FBI, and then they go home and they whack off to old James Bond movies or something and feel good about themselves. And the whole goal of this is simply to keep people scared, to let them know that their friends and neighbors might be snitching on them, to keep them silent, to keep them isolated, to scare the German people or the American people into remaining quiet about all that is going wrong with the nation. And it's under the guise of mental health. Anybody criticizing the government, oh, they've got to be mentally ill. And it's a complete through-the-looking-glass mindset, because the people who think this nation are on the wrong track are not mentally ill. They're just aware. It's the people running around thinking everything is just hunky-dory that need to be locked up, not allowed to operate heavy machinery. So, anyway, by the way, for those of you who keep track of such things, May 1st, yesterday, was Loyalty Day. By imperial declaration of His Most Excellent Highness President Obama, May 1st from now on will be Loyalty Day, so that you can stand up and reaffirm your allegiance to him, or to the United States, or whatever it is they're saying here. And you know something? Little fact from history. Good government that is actually loved by the people, that is serving the people, that is serving the nation, doesn't need to demand loyalty. It'll happen all by itself. When you see a government demanding loyalty, it tells you they don't deserve it, and it will not be returned, as the Tsarnaev brothers have just found out. So everybody's all up there in arms about, Boston terror, Muslim, terror, Muslim. I want to flash back a couple of stories from a while ago. Now remember, we have seen virtually non-stop coverage about the Tsarnaev brothers and Muslims and backpacks with fireworks and, who were they calling on their cell phone. It's just been a saturation campaign for 2 whole weeks now. But there are other acts of terror. And just a couple of them. You remember that wealthy New York Jewish couple? They were planning to bomb the Washington Square Arch when they were arrested. They found explosives in their Manhattan apartment. Hardly mentioned on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox. Hardly got a mention. Then there was that guy down in Florida, Dr. Robert J. Goldstein, who had planned to blow up the Islamic Education Center in Pinellas County. And by the way, I just heard from one of our readers, he's scheduled to get out of prison here in another few months. And again, this didn't get a lot of airplay in the American media. And if you remember, Irv Rubin was the guy running the Jewish Defense League that is actually listed by the FBI as a domestic terrorist cell. And they were planning to blow up a Los Angeles mosque and a U.S. congressman, Representative Darrell Issa. And he was arrested, and before he could go to trial, the poor man he got suicided while he was in prison, so he couldn't blow the whistle. And remember, right after 9/11, there were 2 Israelis arrested in the Mexican Congress with bombs. Hardly a mention there. Isn't that kind of weird? You get a Muslim terror suspect, it's good for banner headlines above the fold and non-stop coverage on the TV networks. And you get these other incidents. involving Jewish extremists. Not worth talking about. We're too busy talking about Michael Jackson and the rapper who overdosed himself to death. And yet, according to the FBI's own statistics, Jewish extremists commit more acts of terror in the United States than Islamic extremists. In fact, the only group committing fewer terror attacks than the Islamics are the communists. I didn't even realize we still had some of those around. Over in Europe, the statistics are even more amazing. Less than 1% of terror attacks in Europe were carried out by Muslims, but boy, do they get all the press. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to the show here, and if you're trying to get into whatreallyhappened.com and having some difficulty, apparently we're being hit with another denial of service attack. We're in the process of blocking the offending IP, and service should be restored here momentarily. Now, getting back to this FBI report on who commits acts of terrorism in the United States. Communists, 5%, Islamic extremists, 6%, Jewish extremists, 7%. But the Muslims get all the coverage. Extreme left-wing groups came in at 24%. Latinos came in at 42%. That's the largest single identified group of people carrying out acts of terror, and you never hear about that in the media. It's always Muslim, 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 Muslim. So let me see if I have this right. 6% of all acts of terror in the United States are by Muslims, or to be more accurate, somebody pretending to be Muslims. We know about all those FBI sting operations. And the U.S. government wants total surveillance on all Muslims everywhere. 42% of all acts of terror committed in the United States are committed by Latinos, and the U.S. government wants to make them all legal citizens. Does this make any sense at all to you? I don't think so. But it's very bizarre. And getting back to this thing about, we're hearing these calls from, they're, the AIPAC slaves. And they're saying, we should have all Muslims under surveillance 24 hours a day. Well, when a white guy goes out and robs a bank, and I don't mean the bank owner, I mean somebody who comes in through the front door, like a traditional robber, and he robs the bank, do people start saying we need to keep an eye on all white people? If a black guy steals a car, do you hear calls for we keep all black people under surveillance? We know there is an epidemic of child sexual molestation in the church. Do you hear anybody saying we need to keep all Christians under surveillance? No, you don't. Only in this one area, this one group that has to be demonized to sell the wars, do they take a single act by an extremist and say, oh, this justifies our keeping an eye on all of them. And again, sauce for the goose. If, in fact, Jewish extremists are committing more acts of terror than Islamic extremists, and this is what the FBI is telling us, then if we're going to keep an eye on all the Muslims in America, we have to keep an eye on all the Jews. And you can just already imagine the screaming and anti-Semite and that we'll hear from that. We're a nation that is supposed to be taking a stand against racism, but have you noticed that all of a sudden, for this one group, the Muslims, it doesn't apply to them. We're allowed to be racist against the Muslims. Same thing the Nazis did with the Jews. And the fact that now it's the Muslims instead of the Jews doesn't make it any more morally right. It isn't. Now, speaking of immigrants, getting back to this issue, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, yesterday at one of these various May Day rallies around the country, says the United States owes immigrants a permanent solution. And he's talking about the illegal immigrants. 11 million illegal immigrants in the country, and he says, we're going to get it done. We have to give them a permanent solution. I have a permanent solution. It's called deportation. And I'm not being racist because anybody who wants to come to this country and does so through the legal process to become a U.S. citizen is welcome. I live in Hawaii. It's one of the most pan-racial parts of the United States of America. I don't have a problem with all my friends and neighbors. They're all here legally. But when you're talking about the illegal aliens, you're talking about a group of people who, by their very presence, are lawbreakers. And Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid seems to want to elevate them above the citizens who have a legal right to be here. We're going to change the laws. We're going to we have to do. What he's after is 11 million instant voters who will vote the party line or be available as soldiers or the rest of that. They're literally advertising to the illegal immigrants to come and get their food stamps, and nobody's going to ask you if you are supposed to be here or not. At a time when we're being told we have to make do with less because the government's running out of money, and they're just flinging it all over the illegals. Does that make any kind of sense at all? The proper function of the government is to do for the community what the community needs but cannot do for itself independently. The community is the legal citizenry of this country. Anyway. Meanwhile, over in Washington, D.C., they've got their own little gambling casino set up, and they've got the big wheel spinning. What will it be? Iran, Syria, North Korea. Iran, Syria, North Korea. Place your bets, gentlemen. Place your bets. Whoever picks the correct target wins an all-expense-paid 2-week cruise on a steam torpedo. Now, the most recent polls are showing that the majority of Americans, vast majority of Americans, do not support a United States intervention in Syria, even if Assad used chemical weapons on his own people. Probably because they remember when the U.S. government was using a banned chemical weapon on that church full of women and children down there in Waco, Texas. So the story has changed. Now Syria is a nuclear threat. Forget about the chemical weapons, they have bombs. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show here, and before we go back to the phones here, I just want to sort of follow up on what I was saying before the break. The current polling is showing that the people of the United States of America do not support military intervention in Syria, even if Assad is using chemical weapons on the hired mercenary army. The American people we're tired of wars. We've been at war against all of these enemies of the Federal Reserve for longer than we were in World War II. We're tired of it. So, what does the U.S. government do? They change the story. It was chemical weapons, chemical weapons, chemical weapons. They're not getting any traction. Let's go back to nuclear weapons of mass destruction. It worked in Iraq, and it's working against Iran. And so now we have, and this story was being reported earlier today, State Department is saying Syria must answer questions about their secret nuclear arsenals. They can't come up with a new lie. Its chemical weapons aren't getting any traction with the American people, so they're going to go back to nuclear bombs. They've got nuclear bombs. We must invade. You have to throw your children onto Syria, or they'll set off an atomic bomb inside the United States of America. And, of course, Assad isn't that stupid any more than Ahmadinejad is. Even if they had nuclear weapons, do you really think they're going to come on over here to the United States and sneak one in and set it off knowing that annihilation would be the inevitable result? Of course they're not going to do that. And apparently the U.S. government thinks you're all stupid enough to believe they might. Going to go to the phones here. Alex in Texas. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling because just this morning I had something happen to me with our banking system, and with our bank that you had mentioned the other day. And it was, they charged me an overdraft, and my account wasn't overdrawn. And it's just like you said, they made I had a few debits come out, but also a few deposits, like a couple wires came in.
Yeah.
From different sources. And I guess their compute. This is what their customer service representative said. Their computer was confused by all the transactions that were taking place in and out of my account, and so the $25 overdraft fee was there to protect in case my account had been overdrafted. And my question to him was,
their computers got confused by all the traffic going in and out of your account. What do they do for their account? They're running for like a department store or a pizza parlor. It's going to have a heck of a lot more traffic than you do. Even for a banker, that is pretty lame.
Well, you know, the only thing my wife was like, you should have recorded this. You should have recorded it and had it on speaker. but we didn't think about it at the time because, honestly, I was just like, let me go through. I was going through my account and I saw something that was odd. A check that had gone in, and it was 00000, and it was just $25. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, wait a second. And then sure enough, I call up and they tell me, the computers must have gotten mixed up, and that you would never have taken the debit out of your account, and you would have never been missing money. But see, here's the thing. I look at accounts that have generally more than $3,000 in them that don't go below, let's say, $3,500.
Yeah.
It's very easy. It's very easy to take 25 here, 50 there, 80 here, and not have anyone be the wiser.
People don't notice it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And they just notice, they look at the first two numbers. If the 3 and the 5 are there, then the 3, the 2, the 1 that's after the 3 and the 5, people don't really look at it. And that happens to my wife. So I went through my wife's account. Turns out, since 2010, since August of 2010, they've taken $700 from her.
Amazing.
Hello?
Absolutely. Well, no, it's not amazing. I mean, we know most of these banks are desperate to stay solvent, and we know bankers as a class are crooks. Look what they just did in Cyprus. And by the way, that Cyprus haircut or scalping or theft or whatever you want to call it netted something like 9 billion euros, which I went and looked at the crime statistics for Cyprus. All of the robberies in all of Cyprus for an entire year, bank, store, individual, don't even come close to that. The biggest bank robbers in Cyprus are the banks.
No, Mike, today what happened, I wasn't in shock because I had it happen before with Bank of America, and they were nice. Well, out of nowhere one day I got a check from them for $1,400, which was the amount in question. But I guess they lost the lawsuit to someone, or they saw that perhaps I could take a different position if they didn't pay me back or compensate me. But it's funny to watch this because I left Citibank. I left a lot of banks, bigger banks for this, and I joined the USAA, which is supposed to be one of the because they do things for our armed services. So it's supposed to be one of the most reputable people.
Well, let me give you a little piece of advice to consider. You are absolutely right. The way the banks operate is they'll ding the accounts for a few dollars here, a few dollars there, and they hope the customers don't notice. If the customers do notice and complain, the bank will give it back. But 9 times out of 10, these little stolen transactions are never noticed, and it is a major source of revenue for the banks. Now, this only works if the bank is really big, if it's a large chain. Small, independent neighborhood banks, it isn't worth their time to play these games. And that's another reason for people to get out of the too-big-to-fail banks. And if you have to have a bank to live life in modern America, find a small, little local bank that doesn't exist outside your states, not part of a big, huge banking chain, and you're going to get better service and they're going to play fewer games involved there. But those big money center banks are the ones that are in trouble because of derivatives and the mortgage-backed security fraud, and they feel perfectly justified in doing whatever it takes to keep themselves solvent, even if what they're doing is unethical, immoral, borderline illegal. And they do it because they know in 90% of the cases they'll get away with it, and the 10% that complain, they'll just cheerfully send the money back. It's a zero-sum game. And, it's a major, major problem. And all of these federal government agencies that are supposed to be overseeing the banks can't or won't do a thing about it. There's another government agency we might as well fire to balance the federal budget because they're not doing their job. Remember, we've got Alan Greenspan on video saying the Federal Reserve System is answerable to no federal government agency. They see themselves as above the laws, and that's why they have this attitude.
Not only that, he came on Money Talks and he just said, well, the U.S. could print its way out of debt anytime it wants. It could just print its notes. And I don't know if you saw that video, but the guy that was sitting next to him just opened his eyes and is like, what did he just say? Because it's baffling But at the same time, it's understandable because they're without any money. They don't have any credibility. They don't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it is what it is. But I just thought it was funny that you had spoken about that on Monday when my wife and I were driving back, and we got to hear that 22-year-old talk, and then today, this very morning, my wife's like, "Hey, can you check the account? I was supposed to get I was up doing some things, and I just want to make sure that they hit." I'm like, "Okay, no worries." And I started looking at them, and I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, there's a bunch of transactions. There's money flowing in and out. Sure, no worries. But that's what banking is for. It's what it's supposed to be.
That's exactly right. I mean, this idea that computers got confused, you are obviously talking to somebody in customer service who doesn't actually understand how computers work. And
no, I told him. That's exactly what I said to him. I said, with all due respect, I know how the programming works. I know how the algorithms are formed. Please don't talk to me like I'm an idiot, because there's fail-safes behind all that, on top of that. So don't tell me that the computers got confused, because computers think linearly. They don't think in sideways. So it's impossible for them to get confused. They will do what you program them to do.
That's exactly right.
Exactly what happens. So anyway, Mike, that's just it. And I just, hopefully some of your listeners, can go back and look at their stuff and make sure that, hey, if you're missing some money here and there, it might just be your own bank, but I just wanted to alert people to that, because this is a pretty big, reputable bank, especially here in Texas. They've got a good reputation, but those tactics are things that are in the works right now.
Well,
anyway, thank you very much, Mike. You have yourself a good night.
Well, you're welcome. Just remember that, a bank being called reputable does not make it so. And banks call themselves reputable in all their advertising. And, of course, the corporate media will never dare speak against the Federal Reserve System any more than Congress will. But it's all just advertising. I remember one of the most eye-opening things that happened to me back when I was working on the TV show Lost. We went down to one of the biggest banks in Honolulu. We were using it as a location. And when we were standing in the customer area, it's beautiful woodwork, rich appointments, looked very, very good. Because of the shooting the show, we got to go behind the counters where the bank employees work. And it was all rotted and falling apart and patched up. It looked more like a set than the set that we were using to do the show on. And it just indicates it's all facade and illusion. They're trying to create buildings and environments that make you feel you can trust the banks. But it's a crafted illusion, just like the TV show Lost was. All right, we're going to grab another phone call. Linda in Rhode Island. Aloha, Linda. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, hello, Mike.
Yes.
I had to call in listening to this guy with the bank thing. For the past month, Virgin Mobile, my husband and I both have that service. They have been taking $1.50 from us every other day. And we call them up and we say, what's this? They say, we're switching over to another computer system, and that's what's happening. They'll give us back our money. Now, the last time we called, they said they're going to give us back our $6 each. We haven't gotten it yet. So think of this now, $1.50 a day. How many people, these kids that yap on their phone that don't notice this is being taken, this Richard Branson must be making a couple $1 million a day off of this.
Yeah, he could very easily do that. One of the reasons I left Sprint years ago is they kept double billing me. And because I use a computer system to handle my finances, the computer kept coming up saying, wait a minute, you already got this bill and you paid it. And and they did it to me 3 times in a row, and finally when my contract expired, I switched providers. But this is becoming the new normal. We're just going to send you bills, and we're going to ding your savings account, and your checking account, and your credit cards. And if you don't notice, we get to keep the money. And if you do notice, we'll just give it back. And that's the new thing. So if, you should, everybody listening to this show, you should be keeping a very close eye on those bank statements to look for hidden charges or charges that shouldn't be there. If you are still using credit cards, you should be looking at that statement carefully every month, because we all hear about this identity theft problem. And, the stories about somebody will get your credit card number and they'll max out your credit card to buy themselves a new plasma TV. That's actually the rarity, because when you get a credit card number and you max it out, it calls attention to itself. 90% of all the identity theft crime involves stealing 1 million credit card numbers and hitting each one for only 25 cents with some innocuous credit charge, most people won't even notice it. They'll just figure, all right, it's just something I had on there. And they're not paying attention because it's only 25 cents. And yet this is the majority of where identity theft is happening. And most people don't notice it, which is why they're just being shorn and fleeced, in wild abandon. And the U.S. government doesn't do anything about computer crime unless it is directed against the major banks or the government's own websites. Other than that, the rest of us, it's open season. And the reason for that is very simple. Computer security is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year business. If the government went out and actually got the computer criminals and locked them up, people wouldn't need to go out and buy secure this and malware that and junk sweeper version 6.0. And that's a multi-billion-dollar business that pays taxes. The government loves computer crime because it's stimulating the economy with that old broken window analogy, which we know doesn't really work. But that's the reason the government turns a blind eye to all of this activity, because, hey, somebody's making money and somebody's paying taxes, and it forces all of us to go out and buy security software for our computers that we don't really need and isn't all that good, but it's just another way to extract wealth from the masses.
Now, doesn't this guy build rocket ships and he's charging people to go to the moon soon or something?
Well, he's not going to the moon, not yet at any rate, but yes, he's building a new version of the spaceship that Scaled Composites is building for him. This one will carry passengers to the edge of space. I think you get something like 5 minutes of weightlessness for some ungodly amount of money. And I'm sure, among the money junkies and the one percenters, he'll get a lot of people who want that ride to space to say that they did it. But yes, he has a huge amount of money. He's extraordinarily wealthy, and not all of it may have been acquired honestly.
Yeah, just think of the scale of that. $1.50 a day from, say, 1 million people every day, and how many people are not noticing and calling up? I think a lot of people are not noticing, because pay as you go. You put money on. I don't talk on my cell phone. It's just a text because I don't want to eat that up and give him more money. But there's a lot of kids that gab, and are not noticing this $1.50.
They're not looking at their bills. They're not looking at their bills carefully.
Well, you have to go online and see the activity, and you start seeing this $1.50, and then when you call there, you can't get anybody that speaks English. So it's hard to talk. And one time I said, could you just give me somebody that can speak English? And they hung up on me.
Oh, boy.
I guess there's nobody there that can.
Apparently not. We don't rate anymore in the business world.
Okay, I just wanted to let other people know, look at that. And it's just, so we're letting this run out on our phones, the $5 we have left. And we're going to go somewhere else. But who knows? Somewhere else they're going to do it too. Yeah,
right now businesses seem, and again, all hierarchical structures inherit the morality of those at the top. And when you have the government and the too-big-to-fail Wall Street banks viewing fraud as the new normal, eventually it infects the rest of our business culture. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. All right, we're coming up on the end of this. Thank you, Linda. We're going to let you go here. We're going to take another break for commercials, and when we come back, going to get back to the war news, the economy news, the snow. There's still snow. May 2nd, it's snowing on the mainland. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab another phone call. John in Georgia. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing? About 3 years ago, I was involved in a car accident which totaled the car. And since my credit was maxed out, my wife went to buy this car. And about 3 months later, we tried to get a bank account, and we couldn't. And we found out that somewhere at the car dealership was selling, because we had our identity stolen, she did, was selling basically the paperwork that they were, I don't know how they got it, was selling it. And so someone in New York, which is a place we've never lived, got a lease to an apartment, tried to open up some other bank accounts, tried to get credit cards, did all this stuff in her name, and it's been haunting us ever since. We can't do anything. Even like when you try to register and they go, let's verify your information, and they'll put this Bronx, New York address in the verification process, and of course I won't select, I'll put none of the above, and we can't get credit or we can't get an account somewhere because they're saying that, we can't verify your information. And so basically, this has been haunting us for 3 or 4 years. And now we had some collection agents coming after us for some of these accounts, which I'm having to not go to court, but I'm having to deal with this now. And it's just from a fraudulent, someone fraudulent at a car dealership. Mm-hmm. So we did some investigation and found out that this happened to about 600 people in this county. And this is in Florida. And so we're basically just part of this, we can never get rid of this. We can't even have it removed from our credit report. It's stuck there. And no matter what we do, it's there. So, just doing something simple like buying a car can create havoc in your life. And it's just amazing that there are no checks and balances for any of this stuff.
No, there isn't, because, they're out there selling identity protection services like LifeLock, and it's just selling you another thing that you don't really need to deal with a problem you shouldn't have to be dealing with in the first place. And again, the government is turning a blind eye to all of this because it stimulates the economy. You're buying all this new stuff you otherwise would not have chosen to buy. It's planned obsolescence, forced consumption. That's the only thing holding the economy up right now. And something you need to keep in mind, a lot of criminals will go to work at places like car dealerships, car rental houses, restaurants, any place where they're going to be handling other people's credit cards, specifically to collect a whole bunch of credit identification. Then they'll quit their job and go on a crime spree. We had a real problem some years ago here on the island of Oahu where somebody was breaking into rental cars and stealing things and not leaving any sign of forced entry. And it turned out the car thieves had simply gone to work for the car rental agencies and gotten their hand on the master key, the one key that will open all the rental cars handled by that agency. And they made a copy, quit their job, and from then on, every time they saw a rental car from that agency, they could just open up the trunk and grab whatever they wanted. And it is a huge, huge mess. We got to take a break for station identification. John, thank you for the call. We will be right back.
Okay, bye-bye.
Welcome back to the show, and following up on these calls we've been getting from John and Linda and the rest of it, there's a story that we have on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com regarding Wonga, which is a payday loan company. It's legalized loan sharking, and apparently they were able to legally raid a 15-year-old schoolboy's bank account to recover money they had loaned out to criminals that had stolen his identity. So they're not going after the criminals. They're just going to go after who's got the money. And the fact that this kid was 15 years old is a violation of the law because legally, borrowers have to be 18 years old in order to get the loan. But whoever was at Wonga just handing out the money to the people who stole this kid's identity, sure, take the money. So it's the whole attitude. Right and wrong and even the law don't apply. It's who's got the money and how can we get it out of them. Which, again, is the hallmark of a fascist economic dictatorship. Now, back to the war zones here. France, which is dealing with its own major economic downturn, has announced they're going to cut their army by 20 million people between now and 2019. They can't afford this whole war machine any longer. And, of course, theirs is just a tiny fraction of the size of the American war machine. And nothing is going to bankrupt a country faster than all the money spent on war because it dead ends the money. You're not really investing the money. You're simply piling up bombs. And then eventually somebody says, well, we've got all these bombs. We might as well use them. That's what that whole project for the new American century was about. That whole neocon agenda. We're the most powerful military in the world. We might as well use it to force our way of life and private central banking on the rest of the world here. Meanwhile, the European Union has lifted their oil embargo on Syria. They're now buying their oil directly from Al-Qaeda, from the oil fields in Syria they have already taken control of and are sucking the oil out, and presumably the oil is being traded for the U.S. dollar. So it's all about the money. It's war for money. War for oil. War for Monsanto. Did you know that Syria bans GMOs? Well, there's a good reason to invade them right there. Down in Libya, there's been another bombing at the police station in Benghazi. It's been hit by bombs multiple times. Apparently, the building wasn't even really being used. It had been bombed last weekend. Today's bomb just finished it off. Those Libyan people do not, for some strange reason, seem to like their new U.S.-approved puppet regime and their brand-new private central bank. Those silly Libyans. Don't they just understand how the world is supposed to be? Meanwhile, we're hearing more and more allegations that the U.S. government is seeking to destroy any left-leaning governments in Latin America. By left-leaning, meaning those governments that actually think the people of the nation ought to own the wealth of the nation, as opposed to the right wings who think the money junkie should have it all and people should live in misery and suffering and surrender their work product for ink and paper in exchange. Partly in response to this, Bolivia's president has just expelled the U.S. aid agency. The U.S. Agency for International Development has been kicked out of Bolivia for seeking to undermine his government. And complained the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been sort of calling the Western Hemisphere the backyard of Washington, D.C. This is a return to the old South American imperialism of the 1960s and 1970s. Now, if you will remember, the U.S. Agency for International Development is officially a non-governmental organization seeking to financially develop areas of the world. It is now pretty much well known. It is a front for the Central Intelligence Agency that uses its NGO status to funnel money into coup plotters, agents provocateurs. They got kicked out of Russia not too long ago, and now they've been kicked out of Bolivia. So I think the rest of the world is finally onto that particular scam. Got to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Paul in New Jersey. Aloha, Paul. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Several years ago, I read an interesting book by a fellow named Robert Proctor called The Nazi War on Cancer, and I recommend it highly because one of the things he discusses is how during the Nazi government, during their rule, there was a significant decline in cancer under their leadership, primarily because of their campaign against smoking and then the promotion of higher fiber breads and better diet. And so here, 70 years later, we have a government with such a lack of imagination. They can't even embark upon a campaign to improve the public health. Now, Michelle Obama might say get out and exercise, but you think we could see a concerted effort by these pathetic politicians and leaders of ours to address the issues of public health, primarily attacking GMO foods and high fructose corn syrup.
Well, there's a simple reason for that, and that is because our current medical establishment doesn't want a healthy population. You can't make money off of a healthy population. You need them to be sick to sell them whatever it is you're selling them this week. And it's all driven by money.
Right, but isn't it remarkable that here the Nazis, who are so disparaged, they actually were very enlightened in the field of public health, and also in the sense of, aside from the war effort, in public works projects, which could give us the shovel-ready jobs that Obama promised. And so I would like to suggest a few potential public works jobs that could make jobs and improve America's infrastructure. And I think you would agree with this. The replacement of the current nuclear reactors with thorium-based reactors.
I agree.
Yeah. Also, how about something that could transfer water, like an aqueduct, going east-west in the mainland using surplus water from the Mississippi and other rivers and channel it out west to Arizona?
Well, there used to be one. There used to be one, but it's fallen into disrepair. It hasn't been maintained for going on 20 years, and the farmers out there in the western part of the United States have been complaining to the U.S. Department of Interior that one of the reasons they're not able to produce the abundance of food they used to is these irrigation systems are falling apart, and they're not delivering the volume of water that they used to. And, we used to have this amazing irrigation system all across the nation, and it's just not performing up to spec anymore.
And if you think of it like in the case of Obama, he's only got a few years left in his office. Why does he, he could do something great to show himself as a great leader and leave a good legacy, much like what Gaddafi was trying to do. People might badmouth Gaddafi, but during his reign, he absolutely improved the standard of living in Libya before we deposed him. I mean, with his aqueduct and his public works projects,
No, the reason we deposed him is because
boom.
The reason they deposed him was he dared to have a publicly owned state central bank and a value-based currency that was very attractive to the rest of Africa compared to the U.S. dollar. That's the reason Libya was invaded and smashed and Gaddafi killed. Same thing with Saddam Hussein. In 2002, he gets UN permission to sell Iraq's oil for euros, undermining the petrodollar strategy. 2003, they invade, lynch the guy. Iraq's oil is back on the market, but only for the U.S. dollar.
But it's tragic. Is this the best that America can become, such a degraded nation where all we make money is now, it seems like, on being indifferent to the population of their own citizens? It's just disgraceful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's that whole mentality. Like I said, it's this planned obsolescence that we're going to sell you a product that will break right out of warranty to force you to buy a new one. And economists like to say, you know, it's the broken window analogy, that if I throw a brick through your window, you will go out and you will bring your business to the glass glazer and, and you'll stimulate the economy and create jobs. The fallacy behind that analogy is that I am spending money to replace that broken window that I might otherwise have spent doing something productive. And that's where that analogy breaks down. But a lot of businesses operate on that. Certainly the computer industry, where the model is every 5 years you have to buy a whole new computer, whole new operating system, all new versions of all your applications. And that's the model, to keep you working as hard as you can just to stay where you are. And so the reality is, from the corporate and governmental point of view, the United States is not a progressive nation. In fact, we're falling backward very, very quickly. But as long as it's generating, revenues that can be taxed, everybody seems to be okay with that.
It seems like just mass cannibalism on an industrial base.
Yes.
Everything just feeding off the dead and predatory capitalism, and no leadership out of it, no enlightened foresight. But in a sense, isn't that what you get when you elect a politician? I mean, look at they're social whores to an extent.
Well, they're sociopaths, and that's the reason when this nation was first started, the federal government had severe, strict limits on it. It existed only to arbitrate among the several states. The states had the power, and what power the states didn't have, the people retained. And over time, under the influence of the money junkies and the fact that people who seek political office inevitably are corruptible, for the most part, there are a few precious exceptions like Cynthia McKinney and Ron Paul, but they're there. Basically, Washington, D.C. is a one-stop shopping center for every corrupting influence in our nation.
Yeah. Hey, one last thing.
Yeah.
You had mentioned before about the project for a New American Century.
Yes.
And their motive.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say, part of the motives of the project for a New American Century is it was just
filled with Zionist and Israeli operatives.
Yes.
If you go by the list of names, because I've actually read the document and went through it, and it reads like a synagogue list.
Yeah, it is. It's all the neocons. It's the Israel firsters inside the U.S. government. What's really kind of amazing, one of their policy papers, Securing the Realm, was actually written for the government of Israel. And then they said, hey, we can sell this to the American people as well. And that's basically what they did. One of their documents, Rebuilding America's Defenses, specifically says that in order to move their agenda along, they needed a new Pearl Harbor. And this came out a couple of years before 9/11.
And it's so devoid of any truth at face value, because how do you murder people into accepting democracy?
Well, you really don't. This was basically just a crafted justification for a new U.S. imperialism. And everybody knows that's what it was all about. And because of that Israeli influence in the project for the New American Century, most of the initial militarism was against Israel's ideological enemies in the Middle East. Break them into little tiny pieces, smash them up. Yeah, everybody on the does not get a Hanukkah card list.
All right, Michael, thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Yeah, have a good day.
All right. Now then, we all know Chuck Yeager, America's test pilot, Mr. Right Stuff himself. Apologies to John Glenn. He has now come out, basically, apparently he's on Twitter and he tweets a lot, and he's saying the F-35 is a waste of money. And he's saying, basically, as near as he can tell, going back to the F-15, which is now an established technology, It can do pretty much everything the F-35 does. No, it's not as radar stealthy, but we're not exactly sure how stealthy the F-35 is. A lot of these so-called radar stealthy platforms turn out not to be as stealthy as we thought they were. For one thing, if you fly in the rain in a B-2, when the rain starts collecting on those surfaces, they light up a radar screen. And Yeager's absolutely right. I know it's important for Yeager to have a clear view to your rear. I remember when I met him, it was up at Edwards Air Force Base, and he was kind of ragging on this F-117 stealth fighter pilot, because you couldn't look backward in the F-117, and he says, you can't check 6 on this thing. And this was a little, young kid, just out of flight school, flying the stealth fighter, and Yeager was his hero, and you could just see this kid kind of taking a bruising, and so I made the point that when you're in the F-117, if you have to check 6, your mission is already over, because that's not the doctrine. But it's definitely true with the F-35. If you look at it very carefully, the pilot does not have a good view to his rear, and that's one of the reasons why the Pentagon came out and said that in a dogfight with its Russian equivalents, the contemporary fighters that Russia is now producing, the F-35 is probably going to lose in a dogfight. Hideously expensive. It costs more than the entire gross domestic product of Australia to design and build this thing. They're actually building the physical airplanes, but they cannot be deployed into active service. The software for the fire control helmet still does not work. The F-35 can't land on a carrier. They put the arrestor hook in the wrong location. Can't fly in the rain, can't fly in the fog, can't be anywhere near lightning or the electronics quit working. It is an absolute disaster. And I know a lot of people talk about how America is the world's most powerful military might based on the dollar value of what we have invested into that infrastructure. But if we're not getting the bang for our buck, the U.S. may be going into this next world war on a flawed assumption or flawed presumption of U.S. military superiority that is not there, against countries like China and Russia that may not be spending as much in terms of cash for their military, but they're getting more bang for their buck. And so Yeager's out there basically saying he's not impressed with the F-35, and neither am I. Of course, I don't have Yeager's experience, but I'm in agreement with him on this one. Very, very nice guy. Little side note. We talk about medical mistakes and how the medical establishment will get reckless with new technology. That's what happened to Yeager's wife. She got ill, and the doctors, they had this brand new thing, the X-ray, and they just kept X-raying her and X-raying her and X-raying her until she died of radiation sickness. Very tragic story. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Come back to the show here, and we're hearing word that there was a suicide attempt inside the Bush Intercontinental Airport, and the story that's coming out, the TV news is saying simply man shot. What we're hearing from WFAA.com is it was a suicide attempt involving an AR-15. That seems kind of a little bit of a weird story for two reasons. One, how did he get that inside the airport? And two, given that it's a long rifle, it's kind of awkward to try and shoot yourself with it. So maybe they're backing off the suicide thing, and they're saying it happened in the pre-screening area. So now I'm sure already the security industrial complex, Michael Chertoff is out there saying, we need a screening system before the screening system. We have to start screening them out in the parking lot. They'll be out there, more money for something that really does not work. I can't imagine why somebody would go into the airport to commit suicide. Yeah, of course, I'm not experienced in thinking about suicide, but it just seems like that's kind of a weird place. You got to pay to park. All right, anyway. Speaking of suicides, we are being told that an attorney who represented some of the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay was found dead in what sources said was a suicide. This is Andy P. Hart, a federal public defender in Ohio. Apparently, we are being told, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Supposedly, he left behind a suicide note and a thumb drive, believed to contain his case files. They're not saying where he died. They're not saying what the suicide note said. They're not saying whether an autopsy was performed. And by the way, legally, if you are not under a doctor's care when you die, autopsies are mandatory. So if you believe this one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. Have you seen this pattern of interference with all of these trials for the Guantanamo inmates? We know from 2 weeks ago when one of the Bush administration officials went public saying that the Bush administration knew at the time most of those people in Guantanamo are innocent of any wrongdoing. And we're hearing all these stories about how files on the computers disappeared or information was given to the prosecutors that shouldn't have been, and going back and forth. And now, of course, this lawyer is found dead of a suicide. They're trying to find some way to prevent the military tribunal from actually happening for a very simple reason. They can't make a case against most of these people. It's going to come out in this tribunal. Most of these guys that have been held in Guantanamo without habeas corpus, without any civil protections, been tortured, they're innocent of any wrongdoing. And that is the reason they're trying to find some way to derail this thing. And now they're down to wet work on the attorneys. Apparently this lawyer, Andy Hart, had gone public. He was on Russia Today just talking about the flagrant violations of human rights against these people. Completely innocent people. The Bush administration knew they were innocent, did not want to release them because it was politically embarrassing. And that's why they're fighting tooth and nail to prevent these military tribunals from happening, and now they're down to killing the lawyers. That's how desperate they're getting here. I'm going to talk about the economy now. This is an interesting article out of Washington's blog here. The Fed engaging in quantitative easing until unemployment falls is like a medieval doctor bleeding a patient with leeches until the iron deficiency goes away. And this article goes into a very well thought out analysis of how all this quantitative easing is not only destroying the value of the money you've already worked for and earned, it is biasing the investment system away from job creation and into the purchase of investment and capital assets. Now, the Fed's claim that they're continuing quantitative easing until unemployment drops is a cover story. They know it's not going to improve the employment situation. It's a flimsy cover story. The fact of the matter is the Federal Reserve cannot stop creating new money to pour all over Wall Street, or the stock market will collapse. And predictably today, with the announcement that QE is going to continue, the stock market is up there soaring, and they're waving it around saying, see, the economy is great. We've got the Dow up close to 15,000. And it's being held up only by all this instantly created money that is buying these blocks of stocks to create a demand that drives the prices up. And the instant the stock market goes down, the too big to fail banks, which are holding these large blocks of stock on their balance sheets, will go down with it. Quantitative easing was supposed to be a temporary emergency fix. It is now a permanent necessity. They're addicted to it. They can't stop now. And the people who pay for all of this are you, because every time they turn on that printing press or type into that computer, the money you've already worked for, the money you have in your pocket, the money you have in your savings account, the money you've got buried in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation, loses value. Quantitative easing is just another way for the money junkies to steal real wealth and purchasing power from you and put it in their pockets. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show here, and they're going on and on about this attempted shooting involving an AR-15. It's an evil assault rifle. They're out there to demonize the guns, and of course they're getting a huge play off of this very tragic story where apparently the story we're getting is these parents gave their 5-year-old son a gun for a birthday present, and there was a tragic accident involving the sister. I'm sorry. 5-year-olds should not be given guns. When I was a kid, when you reached the age of 12, you got your first gun, and you got to talk about gun safety. 5-year-old, the parents are stupid. Or this is something else happened, and we're getting this cover story to demonize the guns. But I'm having a hard time imagining anybody Unless they're like seriously doped up on SSRIs, giving a 5-year-old a firearm, let alone loaded. How is it even loaded? It's ridiculous here. All righty, let's see. More concerns. Again, the stock market is way up. The Federal Reserve is, they were meeting until today. European Central Bank is meeting also today. A lot of, and again, we're seeing inside information about these decisions being leaked to cronies. So the fraud is just out there in the open. The insider trading's out there in the open. Hey, this is just the new normal. This is what we do. You might as well get used to it. Interesting. We're hearing more about sequestration, and there was a big brouhaha over the fact that the FAA was going to furlough air traffic controllers, which was going to increase the hazards to civil aviation, commercial aviation over the United States of America. The FAA has now changed that policy. They're not going to furlough any of the air traffic controllers. They're going to save the money by cutting out other positions like the weather observers. Because after all, once they're off the ground, those big planes go above the weather. We don't need to worry about rain and storms and things like this. All these cuts to all these essential services for the nation. But they got plenty of money for food stamps for illegal aliens. And they got plenty of money for the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA and the BATF and all these other agencies that don't really seem to accomplish anything. And with each new failure, what's the first thing they said is, oh, we need more funding. We need more funding and more authority, and this will not happen again. Then it happens again. What do they say? Well, we need more money and more funding and more authority to keep it from happening again. Anyway. All righty, let's see here. The other economic indicators, we were talking yesterday about how the fact there really is no recovery. Home ownership in the United States is at an 18-year low. The 99% have lost economic ground over the last 10 years. There is no recovery. We are still getting dragged down to third world level economy, and it turns out it is taking a huge price on the American population. The suicide rate among middle-aged Americans has climbed 28% in a decade, which is the decade including the recession and the mortgage-backed security fraud. Now, it also happens to overlap with the sudden introduction of these SSRIs into our population as well. But if you are a government of a nation where your middle-aged, most productive, peak of their career people are starting to kill themselves off, you have obviously done something wrong. Here's kind of a little up story. There was a story the other day about this guy up in New Hampshire who went to one of these carnivals and he started playing this little game where you throw the ball into the tub and you can win a prize, and he wanted to win an Xbox Kinect. And apparently he had something like $2,600 in his pocket. I don't know why anybody would walk around with that much money in his pocket. Supposedly represented his entire cash surplus wealth, and he wound up spending it trying to win this Xbox, not realizing that those carnival games are in fact rigged. And he just got caught up with this one more and I'll win it all back, one more and I'll win it all back, and he went through all of his cash. And as a consolation prize, they gave him a giant stuffed banana with dreadlocks. I have no idea what that's supposed to represent, but that's what he got for his $2,600. It turns out that a popular satire website is offering to buy the banana from him for the $2,600. So the story is going to have a happy ending, and hopefully this gentleman will go home sadder but wiser. But it was really cool for somebody to step in and make good. But yeah, those games are rigged. When they let you have the practice, everything works the way it's supposed to. And when you turn over the money, there's a hidden switch that gets thrown, and it's known. It's known that's what happens here. Now, over in Europe, talking about the economy, they have what is called a tracker mortgage on homes. It's their version of the variable rate mortgage here in the United States of America, and it is supposed to be locked to the prime lending rate. In the United States of America, the prime rate is set by the Federal Reserve. The Bank of England gets to set it over there in the United Kingdom, which includes Ireland. And the Bank of Ireland is supposed to lock these tracker mortgages rates to the Bank of England's base rate. Apparently, in a single day, the Bank of Ireland doubled the rates on all their tracker rate mortgages. They hit 13,500 British customers for an increase in the interest rate, even though the Bank of England base rate did not change. And it's created a huge uproar, backlash against the bank, because the deal is I will pay interest on the mortgage that's tied to that base rate of the Bank of England, and the Bank of Ireland just said, well, we're going to double it. We're running out of money here. We're not making enough money on overdraft payments and the rest, so we're just going to double it. It's amazing here. Let's see, over at opednews.com, interesting article, bailout is out, bail-in is in, and they're saying the time has come for publicly owned banks. They're not going to get anywhere with it, not under the current government, which is enslaved to the privately owned banks. But it's talking about this crossing of the Rubicon into stealing money from your own depositors is going to grow. Cyprus was the test. If we can get away with it there, we'll get away with it everywhere. We know it's already written into the blueprint for next year's Canadian budget. We know it has to spread. That's the new normal. When the bank decides it needs your money more than you do, and you don't really need that money. You know, if you run out, we'll loan you some more at interest. And so that's the new rules. And it is theft. The biggest bank robbers in the world are the banks. As I mentioned earlier in the show, the haircut or scalping or castration or theft that happened in Cyprus netted 9 billion euros. Far more than the take from all of the robberies in Cyprus, bank and otherwise, for the entire year. Remember the Lincoln Savings and Loan debacle? Charles Keating stole more from his customers and investors in that one scam than all of the armed robberies in the United States of America for that entire year. But have you ever noticed that Hollywood always focuses on the street crime, the swarthy guys with the guns and, selling drugs, and they're out on the street mugging and stuff? They're not the cause of the majority financial economic damage to the country. White-collar crime loots 10 times as much money from the economy as street crime. But Hollywood's going to say, pay attention to don't pay attention to those bankers. Those are wonderful guys. Pay attention to the muggers and the liquor store holdup guys. Now, over at the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi is saying they are now open to the idea of a negative savings deposit rate. In other words, when you deposit your hard-earned money into the European Central Bank system, they will take money out of your account just for storing it for you, putting it on their balance sheet. Negative interest. I'm sorry, there's no reason for you to put your money in the bank if they're just going to grab a piece of the action. By the way, following that announcement, gold started heading right back up again. That price suppression from a week ago, where they were trying to scare you into dumping your physical gold, didn't work. Gold is on its way back up. But that's the new model. You will have to pay the banks to be allowed to put your money in a savings account. And once it's in that savings account, the bank can reach in and grab it anytime they need. Is there any reason to be using the banks? I'll tell you the next step. The next step will be laws mandating that all of your money must be in the bank, where the government can look at it and track it and make sure you're not spending it on things they don't want you to be spending it on. That's going to be the next thing, because people are starting to pull their money out of the banks. The bankers don't like it. They're already lobbying various governments to say, banking has to become legally mandated for all people. Just because it's no longer attractive financially, just because it's no longer a benefit to the people, is no reason for people not to have their money in the banks. That's going to be the next step. All your business will be on those little plastic cards, and the bank will get a piece of the action off of everything you do. Swipe that card for a newspaper, bank gets a penny. Swipe that card for a burger at the burger place, bank gets a piece of the action. Because after all, only criminals and terrorists use cash. Meanwhile, over in Russia, and remember earlier on the show, we had commented that Russia had kicked out USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, as a CIA front that was part of the conduit through which money was flowing into Chechen terrorists and other agent provocateurs. Putin has now taken the next step. Russian officials are now banned from owning bank accounts in any private central bank. Remember, Russia took control of their central bank, and they're not allowed to own stock in any private central banks anywhere. And, of course, everybody's up and down, how dare Putin do this? He's imposing the freedom of his own officials to go into the private banking system. And I think Vlad has the right idea. He wants to keep his nation free of the influence of the private central banks, having watched the Federal Reserve destroy the United States more completely than the former Soviet Union could have ever dreamed of. Interesting story coming out of Washington's blog again, and this is echoing a report in U.S. News and World Report, how the IRS is now going out and using all of this newly found freedom to mine databases all around to spy on your shopping records, your travel, your social interactions, who you're meeting with, your health records, anything they can, trying to look for any evidence that you've got more money than the IRS thinks you should have. And I'll bet you thought CISPA was all about fighting terrorism and computer crime. And by the way, all this IRS effort to mine all this data is not directed against the 1%. It's not directed against the large corporations. They're off the hook. Auditing and enforcement against the 1% and the large corporations has been cut back because of sequestration. Something like 18% reduction. All the focus is going on the middle class, the small fry. And it's not even really financially sound because of all the money the IRS spends to go after these small businesses and middle-sized businesses doesn't generate really a return to cover the costs. It's just policy. We're going to slap down those uppity small businessmen who dare to compete with the large, giant corporations here. We're going to grab a phone call here. Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to talk about a book I've recently gone through, Pat Buchanan's Unnecessary War.
Yes.
And it really seems like we're kind of going through the same thing that we did after World War I to set up World War II, which he considers was actually a civil war amongst the Western nations. And, these war guarantees that we're handing out to NATO nations, kind of getting at the underbelly of Russia, it seems that, Adolf Hitler was doing the same things. He really didn't want to wage war on the rest of Europe and France and England. What he really wanted was a war with Russia. That was, that's why he originally wanted the Danzig lands and kind of getting back what they originally had from World War I. And it seemed to go astray when the bankers kind of lost control. And, instead of calling them neocons, we should pretty much call them neo-fascists.
Yeah,
and,
I would agree.
It seems like we're kind of setting up these new games with these new nations that we're trying to get into the NATO alliance. And that's a really dangerous game now with all these weapons that all these different nations have.
Yeah, it is a crisis situation here, and my concern, as I've said many times before, and first of all, you need to understand, the Democrats are socialists, and the Republicans are fascists, and that is the reality of the political war that's being fought here between the money junkies and the rest of us. Now, I'm an old-fashioned capitalist. I'd like to live in a capitalist nation, at least as we thought we were back in the 1950s and 1960s, but if I have to choose between socialism and fascism, I'm going to go with socialism, because fascism is ultimately the most oppressive political scheme that there really is. That being said, my concern about getting the United States drawn into a new world war to save the bankers, or at least distract from this economic meltdown, is the United States is already militarily exhausted. We've drawn down all of our stockpiles of weapons, conventional weapons. We don't have the men, the manufacturing, or the money to prevail in a prolonged conventional war across a large portion of the globe, and that means sometime between now and final capitulation, the U.S. government is going to start turning those keys in the missile silos, and it's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock.
Yep, and that's why we really need to stay on the foreign policy to not make the same mistakes as the history that we've already gone through. And it sure seems like we're setting it back up again.
Well, we aren't. We know better. This is being set up by the money junkies, and if you go back and you read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, the history is these private central bankers will gladly send hundreds of millions of human beings to death and disfigurement as a cost of doing business to keep their little Ponzi scheme going. That's how sick and psychotic these people are. Okay? I guess Tate hung up. All right, let's see. We're coming down to the end of this segment here. The electric car maker Coda has now filed for bankruptcy because these all-electric battery-powered cars are not breaking into the mass market. And the reason is easy. They're being sold as environmentally friendly because it's electric. Where does the electricity come from? Fossil-fueled power stations. So there's no real environmental benefit. There's a lack of recharging stations. You can fill a regular car's gas tank in 5 minutes. It takes overnight for the electric cars. They're not attractive, and it was a boondoggle. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here. Now, earlier we were talking about how the Arizona legislature had passed a law to make silver and gold legal tender within the state. It is sitting on Governor Jan Brewer's desk. As of right now, no word that it has been signed. And remember yesterday I was saying probably by now Jan Brewer's getting all kinds of calls from the Federal Reserve saying we'll support you in a run for the Senate or a run for the White House or whatever. They're pulling out all the stops to keep you enslaved to that private central bank reserve note. And it's really interesting. If you go out to one of those little pretty printed pieces of paper, and it says right up here, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. But there's a word that's missing, and the word is only. It basically says this is not the only legal tender you can use in this country, but that's certainly the attitude of the Federal Reserve. Interestingly enough, when the Federal Reserve note was first put into circulation, it actually included the phrase that the Federal Reserve note could be exchanged for lawful money. They were admitting it wasn't lawful money under U.S. law. The lawful money was the silver and the gold. But over time, that lawful money has gone away, and people who are trying to use silver and gold as currency are being slammed on. And, of course, the most obvious example is the Liberty Dollar, which, when they made the mistake of putting Ron Paul's face on the coins and bruised the poor little ego of President George W. Bush, and the Treasury Department came down and just shut them down, confiscated all the gold and silver, claimed it was for counterfeiting because they put the word dollar on the coin. Now, dollar is not the copyrighted property of the United States government or the Federal Reserve. Other countries use it, like Zimbabwe. There are local communities that will have their local trade dollars. And in no way were the Liberty Dollars made in a way to confuse people whether they were U.S. currency or not. It was just an excuse to shut down an alternative currency. And they got support from the president because, by golly, they should have put George Bush's face on there and everything would have been just fine here. I want to talk about the gun grabbers a little bit, and they're still pounding on this situation down at the Bush airport. As you're probably already aware, the state of Kansas passed a law, and the governor signed a law criminalizing any enforcement of federal gun controls in the state. Attorney General Eric Holder has sent a very stern message to the governor of the state saying what you're doing is unconstitutional. So we're leading to a states' rights crisis. Now, Mr. Holder, you're the Attorney General of the United States of America. I would appreciate it if you were out there prosecuting these Wall Street bankers rather than presuming to decide for the United States Supreme Court what is constitutional or not, because that is not your job. You are not paid to do that. We, the American people, do not cede to you the authority to decide what is constitutional and not. Going to take a break for station identification. Back with hour number 3 after these few words. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the gun grabbers out there. Kansas passed a law saying that any enforcement of federal gun control measures in their state will be prosecuted as a criminal violation of state law. Eric Holder's back out there saying, you will not do that. It's unconstitutional. Boy, I sure wish he was that interested in following the letter of the law when it comes to these Wall Street bankers, don't you? But no, he's going to be tough on the guns. We got to take the guns away from the law-abiding citizens. Otherwise, the criminals could get hurt. And this is now a criminal society. It's a criminal government, a criminal banking system. And by golly, they want to have a safe and healthy work environment to operate in. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. A long time no talk.
Something like that.
Oh, yeah. I don't have a phone anymore, so hopefully my Skype's going to hold up.
Okay.
You were talking a little while ago about the Federal Reserve notes versus lawful money and how you could back in the day. And in fact, I actually remember back when I was in my teenage years. And, it actually said on like a $5 bill, it said redeemable to the bearer upon demand. I remember those days when you could go down to any Federal Reserve Bank anywhere in the country and you could get silver. If you had a big enough denomination, you could get gold. But, I was, a buddy of mine and I made our one of 2 town runs per month. I only go to town twice a month, but made one of our town runs yesterday to go pick up some supplies. And again, I want to reiterate something you always say. I only get paid twice a month.
Yes.
But I tell everybody, pull everything out of the bank, leave only what you need, to pay bills. Otherwise, pay cash. I pay everything in cash.
Yes.
So I pull everything out except maybe $5-10 just to keep the account floating, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But, I guess that makes me a terrorist. But anyway, we went
to Bernanke you are.
Yeah. I hit the bank, pulled out everything except I think like $10 I left in there, and went and did some shopping. And we got a local flea market. It's a really nice little place. You get some great stuff down there. And there's this one case that, it's a really high dollar stuff like silver coins, junk coins, pneumatic coins, really nice silver and gold jewelry, stuff they got to keep protected so people can't slip it in their pocket. And there's this one case sitting in there. It's got all of these 2012 gold coins and silver coins and whatnot. Well, they had some 1-ounce bars, and they kind of caught my eye because I'd never seen them before. So I asked if I could see one of them. Pulls it out, and I'm looking at the top, and it's got, the eagle and this real pretty seal. It says United States of America. And here's what threw me off. I kind of want your opinion on this. I flip it over and look at the backside. It says, and it's 1 troy ounce. It says 0.999 German.
Well, you need to understand something. There are a lot of these investment bars going around, and they can put anything on them that they want. In fact, as a joke, somebody sent me one of these so-called copper investment rounds that is a reproduction of the U.S. Walking Liberty dollar. And something else people need to be aware of, there are more than one kind of ounces out there. We're coming up on the end of this segment here. Art, I'm going to ask you to stay with me through the commercial break because I want to make a point when we come back there. I would actually, as much as I tell people to buy silver and gold, I would stay away from the flea markets because there is some fraud going on out there, and the flea market dealers, they can be there one week and gone the next, and there is fraud out there. We got to take a break for commercials. Art, stay with me. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the things you need to be aware of when you're dealing with investment rounds and bars. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about buying and selling precious metals, which is a really good idea, but you do need to be careful. There is fraud out there, a lot of unethical behavior. And the point I wanted to make here, and again, I have these For those of you on Justin TV, I have a copper investment round and a copper ingot, which is a bit of a shock for me because when I was a kid, copper is what you made the plumbing out of. It's what the wiring was made out of. It was a junk metal, and now it's, an investment metal. And I use these because it illustrates a very important point here. When you talk about buying an ounce of gold or silver, you need to remember there are a couple of different definitions for the word ounce. Now, the reputable coin dealers deal in what are called troy ounces. But if you look on the back, this is both of these are supposed to be 1 ounce. The bar is a 1 troy ounce. On the back of the round, it says 1 ABDP ounce, meaning an avoirdupois ounce. And an can't even talk. The avoirdupois ounce is only 90% of the weight of a troy ounce. And so you need to be really careful when they say, I'm selling you this 1 ounce silver bar. Oh, is it troy ounces or ABDP ounce? Because they can be cheating you just by doing that. See, you need to be aware of that. I remember this big news story somebody was trying to put out about how British cars somehow magically were getting better mileage than American cars, and they were getting all these wonderful miles to the gallon after you converted from liters. And the gag there was that the British imperial gallon is a larger volume than the U.S. gallon. I was a big supporter of the global conversion to the metric system where everybody's on the same standard, and I think much of the opposition to the metric system came from people whose profit margins depended on sort of fudging whether they were dealing in troy ounces or ABDP ounces, imperial gallon versus U.S. gallon, and it's a really mishmash system that does need to be taken care of. And on my list of things for the blueprint for the new America, going metric I think is definitely very high up on there. Everybody needs to know when you say ounce or whatever, or kilogram, that you're all talking about the same thing. So if you are buying and selling investment bars or rounds, and they're talking about this is 1 ounce, you need to be clear. Is it a troy ounce or is it an avoirdupois ounce? Because some of the less reputable dealers are starting to buy and sell in the avoirdupois ounces, and it's 10% less actual physical metal than the troy ounce, which is what the reputable dealers are supposed to be using. So buying junk silver off of eBay, don't go for the numismatic value. That rises and falls with public opinion. You want to buy for the melt value or as close to the spot value as you can. But again, you got to go to a reputable dealer who's going to be there next week. And the problem with the flea markets is that some of those people are going to be engaging in fraud. Not all of them. I know a lady here locally who does all of her buying and selling at the flea market, and everything she has always tested out to be just perfectly fine. But flea markets are where a lot of fraud takes place because they can just sell out their stock of whatever it is, and they're gone the next week, and you've got no recourse. Art, anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I think I need to kind of clarify. This isn't like a flea market, what most people think. It's actually called Vendor Village. But
I've seen those. Yeah, those are cool.
We're talking about a town of like maybe, 6,000 people. So it's not really a big town, and it's actually called Vendor Village, but everybody just calls it the flea market. Mm-hmm. And these are vendors that are there every week. They never go anywhere. They're always there. And my buddy, she's my ride because I don't drive. I travel, but when I go to town, I have to go with somebody that has a license because I just don't want to deal with the garbage you got to deal with if you get pulled over. I mean, I can walk away from it without any problems. I just don't want to spend the hour dealing with these boneheads on the side of the road. So I get her to drive me. And, of course, I put gas in her car and whatnot, so she's actually making a little money on the side there. Of course, we don't tell anybody about that. Because we don't want her to have to pay taxes, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But, she doesn't really know a whole lot about, silver and gold. She's learning. I've been working with her for about 8-9 months now, and she's coming along. She really gets it. This is a 20-year-old young woman. She really gets it. She really understands things when you talk to her. And I was explaining to her because there were some coins in there that were 1 ounce, and then there were others, rounds and bars that were actual 1 troy ounce. And I was explaining the difference between the two. Mm-hmm. And this particular bar I'm talking about was 1 troy ounce. Said on the front there, 1 troy ounce. But what got me was when I flipped it over, And these vendors, mind you, I mean, they got the Liberty dollars, Eisenhower dollars, the Kennedy half dollars. I mean, they got oodles and oodles of these things. They've got the old $1 and $5 bills and $2 bills.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they got a really nice collection, and they're there every single week. But this one particular bar I'm talking about, when you flip it over and you look on the back, it's because it says 1 troy ounce on the front with the symbol in the United States of America and all of that. But when you flip it over, it says 0.999 German.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what this led me to believe was this was German silver.
Yes.
That was minted with the U.S. seal on the front. Now,
There's no law against that. There's no law against that. I mean, this copper bar that I've got here has a railroad locomotive on the front. They can put any... In fact, I saw an investment bar at a coin dealer the other day, had a naked girl on it. I mean, they can put anything at all that they want on there and figure, you know, patriots will buy it. But it doesn't indicate nefarious intent. It's perfectly legal to decorate these bars any way that you want to. Some of them are actually quite beautiful in terms of the quality of the minting of them. And you need to remember, Germany is a major... Let me finish this thought. Germany is a major silver producer. The word dollar came from Germany, from the Thaler silver mines that began the practice of selling their silver in coins of identical size and weight. And because of that uniformity, they quickly became instruments of trade.
Right. Well, I tell you, Mike, these things, I think they were absolutely gorgeous. Uncirculated, you know, I mean, they absolutely beautiful, beautiful pieces. And right next to it, they had rounds to go with them, you know, to match them. Absolutely beautiful. But it kind of threw me off when I saw that German, and I wasn't quite exactly sure how to explain that to her, because the first thing came to my mind was, okay, this has got to be German silver, but I couldn't understand why it would have a United States of America seal on the front.
Because it was struck to sell to Americans. You know, I wouldn't read too much into that at all. I remember when I was a kid and our U.S. coinage was still being struck in silver, some of it was actually quite beautiful in the aesthetic sense of medallic art. And if you ever get to Germany and you get to Munich, you need to visit a place called the Residence Museum. They have a display of medallic art of just how beautiful, well-made coinage can actually be. Now, because we have this clad coinage here in the United States of America, everything has to be what's called shallow struck, a very, very, very thin deformation. Otherwise, that thin coat of silver-looking stuff starts to crack and break, and the copper alloy substrate starts to peek through. And as a result, our modern American coinage kind of looks like gas station game tokens. Done well, medallic art can be quite beautiful, and I've seen some examples, again, in that German museum, some of which were quite racy. You know, the Europeans aren't anywhere near as uptight about sex as we are here in the American part of the world. Art, I'm going to let you go, and we've got other callers on the line. I'm going to switch over to Tim in New Mexico. Aloha, Tim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. Thinking around with silver here a bit and pitfalls. I was listening the other day to Statmuller, and I didn't kind of get the full detail, but he had Paul Drockett on. They were talking about a potential pitfall with the U.S. Coins, you know, the ones that are like the $20 gold pieces and the $1 silver pieces. Well, silver pieces, in that because they're legal tender coins, come a confiscation, the government simply has to say, okay, it's $20. Here's $20, our coin, our money.
Yeah, they'll just trade you ink and paper for the actual physical metal, which is kind of what they've been doing all along here.
Right, and those coins not being commemorative or anything, the government only argue their only value is $20 that is on the coins. I mean, that almost has to be a precaution there with those type of coins that are maybe pure in metal, but are much more easier to confiscate, because the Fifth Amendment thing about compensating for property taken for public use is kind of circumvented that way.
Yeah, but the government gets to decide what just compensation is, and in a lot of these, when Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency to start grabbing public land to pledge as collateral on the growing national debt, And he sold it all saying, oh, we're saving these lands for future generations. No, they were just basically grabbing them away from the people and pledging them as collateral. And they would go in and they would confiscate this public land and in some cases private land under wetlands and heritage river programs. And the government got to decide what was the just compensation for the property. And usually it was pennies on the dollar. Same thing with the foreclosure fraud settlement, where these people who had their entire home taken by the banks through fraud and criminality, and they got $300 apiece, and even some of those checks were bouncing. We've got to take a break for commercials here right now. Tim, thank you very much. You're absolutely right. When they start confiscating these coins, they may just say, oh, it's only worth the face value, and it's just another way of screwing the American people. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Bud in Texas. Aloha, Bud. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Mike. I think what Jeff was trying to get through to you is he thought it might have been German silver. And German silver is not silver at all.
I'm sorry. What is it?
It's nickel. Silver. It's not silver at all.
I would have to do some research on that one. I think it would be very, very reckless for somebody to sell nickel bars claiming them to be silver. For one thing, the two metals really don't look the same. I mean, nickel is quite a bit duller.
That's it's an alloy of nickel. But that's why they call it German silver. And it's not silver at all. It's like saying nickel silver. It's not silver at all.
Okay, well, I'm looking here online, and I see where there are some comments about it. But if you were going to sell a nickel alloy as a silver ingot at a at a coin store, would you actually strike that on there? And maybe it's something that our caller should look into, but I'm not sure that's what it means. It possible, yes. Probable, no. But again, like I said, I think that's the impression he had. Well, it's something that we do need to look at. And again, like I said, if you're going to be buying silver rounds, gold rounds, or ingots, you got to go to a reputable dealer who's going to be there. And I know that this caller said it wasn't really a flea market in the sense that these vendors were there week after week after week. But again, you know, there is a lot of fraud out there. Whether stamping a bar German means it's German silver, I don't know. Might be worth looking into. I'm not willing to commit and say that that's what it means. All right, we're going to go to Mike in Kentucky. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What the fellow's talking about is a 19th century thing German metalworkers did, imitating a Chinese alloy known as Pak Tong, cupra nickel, also called nickel brass, Argentinian new silver, German silver.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look anything like silver, really. I mean, it's just kind of we'd say quicksilver for mercury. It's just a slang term for a tarnished-looking silvery alloy, I think. But, you know, anyway, what you were talking about last hour about how the bankers, the bean counters, want everything tracked and traced. They'd like to put, like the European Union Euros script paper has chips in it, RFID chips, so you can enable the cash registers and the automated tellers to track a bill all the way through its life, from leaving the bank through to whoever purchased stuff with it. And then, so I think the only way to combat this, I don't know what else to call it, but Fourth Reich fascism, technocracy, is to start our own local trade dollars. Like you said, the government does not have any copyright on the word dollars. And, of course, you may have heard of Ithaca hours. There's somebody trying to start volunteer hours down in Tennessee, and another one out in, Colorado. I've heard about literally all kinds of these. It happened in Argentina.
Well, it's happening in the United States. There are some communities away from the big cities that are developing their own internal currencies. We're still waiting to see if Governor Jan Brewer is going to sign this legislation in Arizona to make gold and silver legal tender And I imagine she's probably getting a huge amount of pressure from the Federal Reserve that wants all the currency to be borrowed from them at interest. And if you'll remember, that was exactly the same situation that led to the American Revolution.
Yes.
An honest money system was banned by law, and you were forced to go begging to bankers to borrow their ink and paper at interest. And you're absolutely right about the local currencies and the word dollar. For those of you on Justin TV, this is a Maui trade dollar from the next island off that away. And it was used in small, commerce on the island. It's traded and accepted. I remember one of the stories coming out of the last Great Depression involved the editor of a newspaper in this town, and he needed supplies to run the newspaper. And so what he did is he used his printing presses to print up these coupons that were good for free advertising in his newspaper, and he would trade those for his ink and paper and whatever else he needed. And they became so trusted within his community, people preferred them to the dollars coming from the United States government and the Federal Reserve.
There was even an emperor in San Francisco who was somewhat, I think, eccentric, to put it politely. He was maybe a little bit, off the ranch, so to speak. I forget what his name was, but his joke money became used in San Francisco simply because it was so recognized.
That's exactly right.
Reinforces local businesses and tends to stop some of these economic vacuum cleaners that are sucking all the money to Bentonville, Arkansas, or Cincinnati, or to China.
Mm-hmm.
It reinforces local businesses if they'll participate in it.
Yeah, it did. That's the justification for these Maui trade dollars and Catalina trade dollars. It actually stimulated local community-based business. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to read you a quote. It's one of the ones we have in our random quote file, and one of the people in the chat room reposted it. And the quote goes, "The refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system, which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators, was probably the prime cause of the American Revolution." And that's by Ben Franklin, who has his picture on the $100 bill. By the way, in response to that caller who called in and said that there's a possibility that the U.S. Treasury issued gold and silver coins because they do have a face value on them, in the event of confiscation would be redeemed only for the face value, there's an easy solution for that. Pure gold and pure silver are very soft metals, and it's considered a fungible material, meaning it's worth exactly the same no matter what shape it's in. So if you start hearing confiscations going on and they're only paying the face value for these coins, just take a hammer and whack them into a lump, put them in a vise and squash them out flat again so you can't read any the face value, and just say, here's a lump of silver and gold, you got to pay me the melt value. Push comes to shove, the government will just simply say, this is what we're paying for it. We're going to go back to the Bretton Woods, and gold is only worth $35 an ounce. They could easily do that. They're going to do whatever they feel they can get away with. Now, getting back to the gun grabbers, down in Texas, down in East Texas, town of Gun Barrel City. Love the name. Gotta love the name. They have now, just like so many other cities across America, passed a resolution requiring citizens to have at least one firearm in every single home. And we already know what's going to happen. Crime is going to drop. Crime is going to go right down. Another tragic murder story coming out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Apparently a father stabbed his 26-year-old son to death because the son called him old. And yes, the father was on antidepressants. Alrighty. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, this is May 2nd. We're like less than a month away from the official start of the summer vacation season. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. It is still snowing on the mainland. Snow hit Colorado, Wyoming, all across the Midwest. Record snow in Michigan, Illinois yesterday. Texas City saw a 67-degree temperature drop. Things are getting weird out there. And the carbon Nazis are still out there. In fact, somebody just put up another story at whatreallyhappened.com where now scientists are trying to claim that the reason the Arctic ice caps are growing is global warming. These guys can't admit they were wrong. They can't admit they sold out their science in exchange for funding. All of their dire warnings and forecasts and predictions have cratered. 10 years ago, they were saying snow is a thing of the past. And now that we've had record snow for several winters in a row, oh, no. What we meant is global warming will have more snow and more ice. Remember when they were screaming that global warming was going to shrink the ice caps, and now the ice caps are growing, and they're saying, oh, that's the fault of global warming too. Anytime somebody says there is no such thing as a wide-ranging conspiracy against ordinary people, you point to this human-caused global warming hoax. Because it involves NASA, NOAA, the United Nations, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the University of East Anglia, the New Zealand Climatological Agency, Hadley CRU, Penn State, everybody in the corporate media, Science Channel, Discovery Channel, National Geographic still pushing this stuff. Yes, it was a conspiracy to guilt you out of carbon taxes and into obedience to a global environmental authority, and they got it wrong. They saw the temperature starting up in the 1990s, and they said, hey, we can take advantage of this, say it's a trend, blame it on people, and guilt them into agreeing to all these new laws and taxes. And then nature did what nature always does, just sort of goes on doing what it's going to do, and we've had several record winters in a row, and everybody who sold their reputation into this thing, they've got frozen egg on their face, and they're trying to figure out some way they can get it off here. Going to go to the phones here. Sam in Oklahoma. Aloha, Sam. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just thought I'd let you know that I was at a cancer center in Tulsa, Oklahoma called Camelot. My wife has cancer. She had it previously. We defeated it by natural means, and they only gave her 6 months to live. That was 4.5 years ago. Her cancer came back. Anyway, we're in this cancer center in Tulsa. They've been doing this for over 12 years. Everything they do was on the Internet. While we were there, the FBI and the FDA raided the place. My wife had been there for 8 days of treatment. They give medicine to take home with you for another 12 days of treatment. And we were leaving as they came in, and they made all the patients, they made them take off their IVs and told them to leave. And so I had the box of stuff in my hands. I set it down, put my coat on. As I started to pick it up, an FBI agent with his fist slammed it down and said, "You can't take that." Long story short, they kept me and my wife, who had not had anything to eat because she had fasted before the treatment. They kept us for 2 hours. I went to use the restroom. They made me take off my coat, take everything out of my pockets, and wouldn't allow me to take the medicine home with my wife. And now she is now starting to decline, and I'm pissed about it.
As you should be. As you should be.
And honestly, I had paid $13,000. They have sealed all the accounts for the cancer center, including the owners. And so, anyway, my wife is taking a turn for the worse. We do not want to do radiation and cutting. She's had that done 3 times before, and she's just had enough of it. And anyway, what bothers me is that I'm a 60-year-old man. We still have 3 kids at home. I have 2 master's degrees. I was a chaplain in the Navy. I didn't do this because they scammed me into it. I did my research about what they do. I made a choice. Which interests me, I can't make a choice for the health care of my wife, but a 15-year-old girl can make a choice to abort a child with a day after pill now. I don't get it.
It's all driven by money and politics, and I deeply empathize with you, and I hope the best outcome for your wife here. And I got to watch my mother go through the same thing. She came down with cancer. It pretty much bankrupted the family. They gave her radiation and chemotherapy all at the same time, and to this very day, I think she died of the treatment rather than the cancer. And
well, if you do your research, most people do. Only 2% of the people after 5 years that have been treated with chemo or radiation are alive. Less than 2%. That's American Cancer Society numbers.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Not too long ago, they came out with a study that showed that the chemotherapy actually does make the cancers worse when they come back. They're more aggressive. They're more immune to treatment. There have been several scandals involving alternative therapies that were proven efficacious in other countries. I remember a big one over the hydrazine sulfate. And the reason this one got some press is it involved the wife of the former Penthouse publisher, Bob Guccione. And she had come down with cancer, and she opted for this alternative treatment. And in researching all of this stuff, they found out that the National Cancer Institutes had intentionally rigged the testing. When they were testing this hydrazine sulfate, they rigged the test so that they would fail. And there's this doctor in New York, and I'm blanking on his name right now, I'll have to track him down, had been getting really good results with this alternative treatment. The problem is hydrazine sulfate is a very inexpensive chemical. There is no patent on it. It's in the public domain. You know, it's like $50 for a month's worth of this treatment, and cancer is big business. And so they're going to go out and crush anything that is competing with whatever is generating the maximum profitability.
Well, this is called Laetrile, what they were treating my wife with.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And B-17. And, you know, the FBI agent took me and my wife along in the room and said, this has cyanide in it. And I said, I know, but it's not released except when a cancer cell gets in touch with it. And it only affects a cancer cell. And he said, well, we're trying to protect you. And I said, sir, I don't think, first of all, I don't need your protection. But you just don't know what you're talking about. This thing has been proven. They've been using it for years.
In other countries, yeah. Down in Mexico they're using it.
And I should have just gone to Mexico, but this was close. The money, the $13,000, my father-in-law loaned it to me out of their retirement account. They're in their 80s.
Man.
And I have no recourse, you know.
I know you don't. The desire for money has come to rule our society so completely. They don't want you healthy. They make more money off of you when you're sick. We had that report that we were talking about last week, where hospitals that did a lot of mistakes in surgery were actually more profitable than hospitals who got the surgeries right on the first try because they kept going back to do it again, and the patients and insurance companies were being billed. Whether consciously or unconsciously, they're just going to do whatever it is that generates the maximum revenue return. Doctors are now being judged by these hospital corporations not on the basis of how many people they cure or make well, but just how much revenue they generated for the hospital. That's the sole criteria for a doctor's reputation these days.
Yeah, it's horrible. I mean, the Cancer Centers of America, or there's sometimes they call them Cancer Center of Tulsa. First of all, they won't accept you unless you have insurance. They won't even talk. They won't even let you. They won't even look at you.
They got caught fudging their cure rates. There's a lawsuit against them for false advertising because their claimed treatment survival success rates on their commercials is not supported by the actual numbers.
Well, and also they don't take any cancer. They don't think.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. But anyway, I just want to get that out there that, this is what's happening. It's happened to me. I tell you, it's just, I have heard of these things, but, these guys came with guns. Every one of them had their, guns by their side, readily apparent. And just, just coming in and upsetting all these patients, whether this works or not, it's just horrible.
It is. Sam, before I let you go here, I've been asked by our control room operator if after you stop talking to me, stay on the line because I think one of our other hosts wants to talk with you about this issue, and it is a very important one. While you're going off to talk to that other host here, many, many years ago, when I was still young, living with my family in Southern California, I was dating one of the female staff members at the Queen of the Valley Hospital at the time they got their first CAT scan machine. And I saw the memo posted on the wall in the unit secretary area when I went over there to pick her up to take her out for a meal after she got off work. There was a notice that at every opportunity you will prescribe a CAT scan, because if we don't keep this thing running, 24/7, we can't make the payments on it. And so even back then, treatment, diagnostic decisions were being made on the basis of generating the maximum revenue, not what was best for the patient. We went through this with my wife, where she developed these excruciating joint pains, and for 4 years we went through the orthodox medical establishment. They put her on Neurontin, which is not even supposed to be prescribed for pain, but they were doing that, hideously expensive, special shoes, ointments, all that stuff. We finally figured out for ourselves that she was reacting to these preservatives in low-end cosmetics and household products called formaldehyde precursors. Once we got rid of all of those, the joint pain problem went away. It took 4 years, and I cannot even tell you how many thousands of dollars to the orthodox medical establishment, and ultimately they didn't solve the problem. We did on our own. And I'm not a Christian Scientist or anything like that, but I think the longer I stay away from doctors and hospitals, the better I'm going to be. Now they're talking about this national database system to track all your medications, to make sure that you're getting all the vaccines that they want to sell you. And for these people being harmed by vaccines, by Sam's wife, my mother, if there is an essential, inalienable right of mankind, it is the right to decide for yourself what you will put in your body, what you will not put in your body. Your freedom to choose your own medical care, and that is being taken away. The FBI doesn't have any business shutting down a medical establishment. They're there to protect the financial interests of the cancer industry, because it's a huge money-making situation. They don't want low-cost alternatives. They don't even want cures. They just want to sell you more treatments. All this fundraising about we're searching for a cure for whatever. Nobody's really looking for a cure. They haven't found one, have they? But they always have another treatment that you will have to take every day or every other day for the rest of your life at hideous expense. It's all about maximizing profitability. They want to shut down natural herbal medications you can grow in your own backyard. They don't want you to have the freedom to choose for yourself how you're going to deal with your own illnesses. You will go to the doctor. You will spend money on whatever it is. And they don't want you to know about natural alternatives. I was talking to a very dear friend of mine the other day dealing with major joint pain, and I said, try alkalizing your diet. Because when you're at my age, especially in the springtime, you're going to get attacks of gout and bursitis. And, of course, the medical establishment have all these very expensive toxic medications they'll sell you to treat those things with. But if you just alkalize your diet, those problems go away. You'd have no idea how many minor medical issues will simply not happen if you have an alkaline diet. But the medical establishment doesn't want you to know about that. Anything goes wrong, come on down there and we'll sell you another pill. They don't talk about changing your diet. In 4 years of going to the doctors, they never once mentioned maybe your wife is reacting to some of these toxic chemicals that are in the cosmetics and household cleaners that you're buying. Not one of them ever said that. We had to figure it out for ourselves. Not one of these doctors ever said you need to take something out of your life. It was always take something in. Another pill, another this, another that, another injection, another whatever. Another test, another diagnostic. It was all sell, 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 sell. These hospitals are the biggest drug pushers on the planet. Going to take a break for commercials. Sam, I hope you're connecting with whoever's connecting with you. Don't drop until they talk to you. We'll be right back. Getting a lot of response already to Sam's phone call. We've all lost people to these horrible circumstances of the medical industry, which is not about medical, it's not about health, it's about industry. It's just another money-making venture. They want you to be sick because then they can sell you another cure. Once you get onto that prescription medication treadmill, the average American has between 10 and 15 different bottles in their medicine cabinet. Have you seen those commercials where they're trying to get you to try the new medicine, and then at the end it says it may cause these side effects? Because the new business model is, we're going to get you to take this pill. Oh, it's got an unpleasant side effect. We're going to give you another pill to deal with that side effect. Oh, that one produced a problem. Well, we'll give you another pill for that. It's all about maximizing profitability. They don't want you to be healthy. If Americans were 100% healthy, all of these medical establishments would be out of business. They need you to be sick. And that's really the bottom line. Getting emails from listeners, heavy snow in eastern Iowa, heavy snow in Kansas City. And just think, if the government and the corporate media are willing to lie to you about global warming, they're willing to lie to you about everything. Last phone call for the day, George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? There's a story down in South Florida in Palm Beach County. Sheriff Bradshaw of Palm Beach County accepted $1 million grant from Homeland Security and to set up a hotline to find out, to have people turn people in who hate the government.
Yeah, we talked about that in the first hour. It's, be a snitch for the U.S. government, It's Nazi tactics.
The thing is, I'm about ready to call the sheriff's office and say, the Florida Constitution says you're a constitutional officer to enforce the Constitution, and you have no business taking money like this. Basically I'm going to tell them, you have no business taking money like this.
Well, I imagine a big chunk of that $1 million went for some brand new perk for his office, some piece of new equipment he wanted, or a better, company car for him to drive. I mean, that's how the society gets corrupted here.
I watched my father pass away from cancer, and one thing you ought to also be aware of is be aware of hospice. It will kill you quicker than a second.
Well, that's kind of the thing. Well, you understand, under Obamacare, we're starting to see this push for doctors to be able to put a DNR, do not resuscitate, on your chart, even against the express wishes of the patient or the family. And we know what that's all about. Does this patient have any more money? No. Does he have any more insurance? No. It's time for him to die. It's really what it's all about. George, got to let you go. Almost out of time, and I want to close by reading this picture of a T-shirt somebody just sent me in. It says, I take aspirin for the headache caused by the Zyrtec I take for the hay fever I got from Relenza, for the uneasy stomach from the Ritalin I take for the short attention span caused by the Scopoderm I take for the motion sickness I got from the Lomotil I take for the diarrhea caused by the Xenical, for the uncontrolled weight gain from the Paxil I take for the anxiety, from the Zucor I take for my high cholesterol because exercise, a good diet, and regular chiropractic care are just too much trouble. And that's exactly what it is. They're luring you in. I remember we lost my youngest brother to symptoms arising from 2 prescription medications he was on that the manufacturers say should not be taken together. They don't care about your health. It's all about getting more money from you. That's it for our show. Back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Right now, out there in America, there are a lot of people who are starting to ask questions about what's going on in this country. We need to reach those people and draw them into where they can find the truth about what's going on. So please take time to communicate Republic Broadcasting and what really happened to all of your friends, your social network. Lead them into where they can find the answers to their questions. Thank you very much for your continued support, and aloha, America.
With financial uncertainty circling the globe due to